I'm going to be talking about all of the underrated non-EX cards in this video today. Welcome back, guys. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. I have this Pokemon TCG Pocket card database pulled up right now, and we're going to go through all of the cards that I personally think are sleeper cards that aren't EX cards. So the reason why we're not going through the EX cards is because non-EX cards only give up 1 point, and only giving up 1 point I think is super essential in Pokemon Pocket and making sure that you take those games more consistently. So we're going to start off with the colorless type Pokemon, and in this section there are 3 Pokemon that I want to highlight, and those Pokemon are Tauros, Dodrio, and Kangaskhan. Actually, I lied, there's 4. Pidgeot and Kangaskhan. Nope, I lied again. It's actually 5 Pokemon that I want to highlight here. There's 5 Pokemon that I want to highlight in this section. So, Kangaskhan, Aerodactyl, Pidgeot, Tauros, and Dodrio. So, let's go ahead and start with this first page. So, Tauros. What do I have to say about Tauros? Tauros is a tanky Pokemon at 100 HP and does 50 damage for only 2 energies. This is a very consistent attacker for 50 damage that can set up your EX Pokemon to take one-hit knockouts. So that's why I think that Tauros is actually a very underrated card right now. And again, being at 100 HP gives him some really good bulk so that he can survive if you accidentally draw him, turn 1. And then if your opponent is slow to get their bench online, you can start charging up Tauros and start chunking for 50, and maybe even start taking some like early knockouts with 50 damage. 1 Giovanni, and you could take out a basic baby Pokemon that has 60 HP. So, that can come as a surprise. And yeah, I think that Tauros is just super underrated right now. Definitely a card that you should consider adding to your decks as kind of a staple card. I would consider Tauros actually a semi-staple card because he can be splashed into many types of decks that kind of need that 50 damage breakpoint to help your other Pokemon get those one-hit knockouts. So that's Tauros. Next up is Dodrio. So I want to highlight Dodrio because its retreat cost is actually 0. So this gives you really nice pivoting options without having to discard an energy. Its attack is only 40 damage, and it is a stage 1, which makes it not as good as I want it to be, but I think it still has its uses just because of the fact that its retreat cost is free. Having a free retreat cost is very strong. You don't have to rely on X speed, and you're able to keep your energy economy just like topped up really good. And if you pivot out of the Dodrio, you attack with another Pokemon and you put him in range of Dodrio, it's like a decent revenge killing option. So yeah, Dodrio is super underrated, although again, being stage 1, it does have its drawbacks, but I still think that Dodrio is a card that you should consider using in your decks as a good pivot option. Next I want to talk about is Pidgeot. Pidgeot has Sabrina built into it as an ability, which is absolutely crazy. Sabrina, as we all know, is like a staple card in Pokemon TCG Pocket, and so having it in the form of an ability is amazing. You could theoretically Sabrina and then, use Drive Off on the same turn, although I don't think that's going to make any difference. So never mind. It's not that cool. But just the fact that you can do it is kind of funny. But yes, having the ability to just switch in a different active Pokemon from the bench is really powerful. This is also super powerful in the physical TCG in the form of Boss's Orders. So this is a card you should consider using in your decks. Again, also very splashable. It is a colorless type Pokemon. The only problem is that it's stage 3, so it's hard to get online. So that is the biggest drawback of this card. Nonetheless, this ability is super good, and when you're cooking up some decks, consider running a Pidgeot line to see if it works out pretty well. Also, 70 damage for 2 energies is pretty nice as well, so not terrible. And now you might be wondering why I'm not highlighting Farfetch'd. Farfetch'd does 40 damage for 1 colorless energy. Well, it's nice, guys, for some early pressure, but early pressure really doesn't really matter. I feel like in most cases, they just retreat or they just lose 1 point. It kind of puts them in the back on their back foot, but it's not huge. If they can still just continue to charge up their bench, they can still take games. It's a little scary being chunked by 40 from a Farfetch'd, but you just keep calm and you just keep playing your game, and I think it turns out to be just fine. Also, 60 HP on this Pokemon, it kind of ends up being a liability on your bench, right? It gets Sabrina, then it gets one shot very easily, which is one of the reasons why I don't like it. But again, that's my opinion. That's why I'm not really highlighting Farfetch'd in this video. Next, I want to highlight Aerodactyl and Kangaskhan. First up, Aerodactyl. So this is a Stage 1 Pokemon, which kind of sucks. Basics are the king of Pokemon TCG. But still, this has a really cool attack, and it just absolutely destroys Stage 2 decks, and to an extent, Stage 1 decks. Primal Wing Beat, flip a coin. If heads, your opponent shuffles their active Pokemon into their deck. This is... you can kind of troll some wins off of this by shuffling their only EX Pokemon that they have on their board back in their deck, and then they have no Pokemon. You just steal the win, right? The damage, I air quote this, the damage on this is infinite, right? Because you just shuffle the Pokemon back in the deck. Doesn't matter if they have 500 HP. If they get shuffled back in the deck and they got no Pokemon to promote, you basically did 500 damage, right? So Aerodactyl, I can see. I would consider a very good card, very splashable as a tech card into very many decks. So in that sense, I would consider it a staple. I'm air quoting because staple cards are a little bit more usable and splashable into like every single deck. But I would kind of consider it a semi-staple just because of the fact that it's splashable. And then Kangaskhan, I absolutely consider to be a staple card because this thing is tanky, 100 HP, Dizzy Punch, 30 damage, 1 energy. 30 damage for 1 energy is great. The only thing that I hate about this card is that it is a coin flip card, and you have a chance to do 0 damage. But you also have a chance to do 60 damage, and that just one-shots a lot of baby basic Pokemon. So, Kangaskhan is a love-hate relationship, but still, it's very good just for the HP to stall for turns as you charge up your bench. That's kind of the main reason you play Kangaskhan, and then you put some potential early pressure with Dizzy Punch with just a single energy. So that's usually why we play Kangaskhan. Kangaskhan is a very solid card. If you don't have any Kangaskhan's yet, or need to fill out your deck with some more basics Pokemon, then Kangaskhan is a really good choice to play in your deck. And also 30 damage sets up the math for a lot of Pokemon to do one-hit knockouts into the current meta, with Mewtwo being #1 meta right now, as well as Pikachu. So yeah, Dizzy Punch is a good attack, and the fact that it has 100 HP is very strong. Let's go ahead and move on to the water type cards. These are cards that I think are really good, really underrated, and are also splashable into other decks potentially, or are just really good cards to use in water type decks in general. So the first one is going to be the Greninja because of the Water Shuriken. You technically don't even have to run water energy. You simply used Greninja for the extra 20 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. You can snipe something that is on the bench, or you can set up the math so that you can one-shot a Pokemon. Again, you don't even have to use Mist Slash at all. Also, 1 retreat cost is really nice, right? So it doesn't get stuck in the active spot by a Sabrina. So yeah, I consider Greninja a really good splashable card. The next one is Seaking. Flip a coin. If heads, this attack does nothing. 80 damage for 1 energy is kind of insane, but of course at a 50% chance. But just like Kangaskhan, right, you have a 50% chance to knock out those really weak basic baby Pokemon for some really good early pressure. You can definitely cheese some games with this card. So, water decks that kind of just need to fill out their decks with a good attacker while you charge up your bench. This is not a bad card. 100 HP is really good as well. So yeah, I would consider adding Seakings to your water type decks if you have room for it. Next up, the card that I want to highlight is Frogadier, specifically Frogadier and not Greninja, just because it has a attack that only requires colorless energy. So if fire ever starts to become meta and you just need to run a tech card, you could drop in a Frogadier in there to hit for 50 damage onto onto fire Pokemon to set up some potential math so that you can finish them off with your EX Pokemon or your stronger type Pokemon. Very interesting card. So, 50 damage for 1 energy is powerful. I would also like to highlight Swanna and Ducklet because they're also very similar in that sense that these cards only require colorless energy to deal their attacks, so you don't have to run water energy in the deck. 74 3 energies is a little bit expensive, but again, if fire starts to become more meta, maybe we could see this as a tech card that people might try to run if that ever happens. Moving on to Starmie. So kind of like Dodrio, this is like the Dodrio of water type decks. So Wave Splash, 1 energy, 40 damage, but a free retreat cost. So with the same reasoning as Dodrio being good, this card gives you some really easy pivot options and revenge killing options for water type decks if you need that. Moving on to fire type cards, the card that I want to highlight for sure is the Scorch. Scorch is a stage 1 Pokemon with 130 HP. That is a thick boy, and a Fire Blast attack that does 130 damage. 130 damage is very nice because it one-shots a ton of Pokemon. Very notable is that it will one-shot Pikachu EX, so Scorch decks have a decent matchup into Pikachu EX decks, actually. In addition, the legendary birds, have 140 HP generally, and so all it takes is a Giovanni to take out the birds. The birds are used widely in the current Pocket meta, so yeah, just being 10 damage off from one-shotting those Pokemon is very, very solid, like very, very good. And then additionally, I talked about Tauros as well, right? Doing 50 damage. Scorch is able to then revenge kill many stage 2 Pokemon after being hit by Tauros. Like, right, for example, Charizard EX has 180, so does Machamp EX, so does Blastoise EX. Those all have 180 HP, so a Tauros combined with a Scorch sets up the math perfectly for those decks. Venusaur has 190, but gets hit for weakness, so it also is just perfect into that matchup as well. That's the only card that I wanted to mention in the fire type. Let's go ahead and move on to the next type. So with grass, I wanted to highlight Skiddo. Skiddo is a grass type Pokemon that does 40 damage for 1 energy, but it is due to coin flip. So either you do 40 or you do 0, but also to highlight this is that it only takes a colorless energy. So once ground or rock type decks, fighting type decks that have grass weakness become meta, you could maybe see Skiddo being used as a tech card to take maybe early knockouts or to set up the math. Although it being a flip effect for this attack, it's very possible that people just don't do it because of the randomness and just the inconsistency. So, but still wanted to highlight that this is one of the cards that can deal damage without needing a grass energy, so you can run it as a tech card if you really wanted to. Other than that, that's really all of the grass Pokemon that I wanted to highlight. I don't think that very many other grass Pokemon are quite splashable into other decks right now, at least not from what I can see currently. But if you think so, definitely leave a comment down below. Next up, let's take a look at Psychic. So for Psychic, I wanted to highlight Jinx. So Jinx is a 80 HP Pokemon that deals more damage for each energy that is attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. So 30 plus an extra 20 for each energy. This is usually ran as a tech card into cards that use a lot of energy. So usually those are like the stage 2 type decks like Charizards, Blastoises, and Venusaurs. They need like 4 energies. So that means Jinx is hitting for an extra 80 damage. So 80 plus 30 is 110 damage. This leaves those cards with about 70 HP, leaving it in range for a lot of things to kind of come in and revenge kill it, or Jinx can also just come in and revenge kill it as well. So Jinx for 2 energy can output a lot of damage potentially. And of course, if you're not playing into those decks that attach a bunch of energy to the Pokemon, then you just don't bench the Jinx. That's kind of the idea behind it. And I'm not even going to highlight Gardevoir because that's not even an underrated card. It is used in all of the Mewtwo EX decks. So moving on to the next type. The next type I want to talk about is the fighting type. So like those colorless type Pokemon that are different types, or sorry, not colorless type Pokemon, the elemental type Pokemon that have colorless attacks, Mienshao is very similar. So for a colorless energy, you can deal 40 damage. So I think that, you know, you can run this potentially as a tech card against electric type decks. Currently right now we have Pikachu, right? So hitting for 60 for 1 energy is not terrible. Although again, being a stage 1 Pokemon, you have to find the pieces to get it going. So I think that's why we don't really see too much Mienshao being ran as a tech card. But hey, maybe someone just has to start using it to great effect until it starts getting popular. I think that this card, you should keep an eye out on. You should keep an eye out for it, and maybe even try it as a tech card if you're having trouble into the Pikachu matchup. The other fighting type Pokemon I wanted to highlight is Hitmonlee. Now, not necessarily splashable, but this attacks Stretch Kick, 1 energy to do 30 damage to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon. Very similar to Zebstrika, but this is a basic Pokemon, which is huge. So you can just slap this down and snipe someone without them even, you know, seeing it coming, right? It's a very nice surprise option. So Hitmonlee definitely gets a shout out over something like Zebstrika. So moving on to the next type, very similar to Mienshao and Frogadier and Swanna and stuff, Goldbat is your dark type Pokemon that takes only 1 colorless energy to do 40 damage. So into psychic type matchups, Goldbat can put on some very strong early pressure if you draw into it, right? Dealing 60 damage for 1 energy. Super powerful for early pressure early on. It's a solid card, especially right with Mewtwo running around. I think that, you know, it's definitely worth using this card if you are struggling, if your deck specifically is struggling into the Mewtwo matchup. The next element is Metal. Metal has some interesting cards in the form of Melmetal. So Melmetal for 4 energies does 120. It's very expensive, but Meltan kind of helps out with that with its amass attack, being able to take 1 steel energy from your energy zone and then attach it as an attack. So it basically allows you to get Melmetal a little bit earlier. And then Hard Coat means that it doesn't get one-shot by a lot of Pokemon, which is really, really good. And then 120 into the meta is really good, right? And we already talked about it. Pikachu is 120 HP, so Melmetal does pretty well into the Pikachu matchup, being able to one-shot it. Zapdos is 130 HP, so all it takes is 1 Giovanni to knock that out. I think that Melmetal probably has a little bit more issues into maybe water type decks because and fire type decks, because those legendary birds are at 140 HP, so you kind of have to set up the math properly. But that's why I think that Mawile is not a bad choice. 20 damage is exactly how much damage you need in order to set that up, and then also having the ability to discard energy from your opponent's active Pokemon can be very useful and could take games, because sometimes you just need that single energy, right? Either to retreat or even to just set off an attack. So I think that Melmetal and both Mawile kind of have some decent synergy there, and Melmetal definitely deserves a spotlight, definitely deserves a shout out. And then our final type is Dragonite, but I don't think this card is actually underrated at all. I think that this card is actually being used a lot, and it's a very good deck, very interesting deck, because it's a stage 3, or sorry, I keep saying stage 3, stage 2, that can deal 200 damage in 1 turn, and it is not an EX type Pokemon. So it's a lot of damage for non-EX, so you're only giving them 1 point, 1 prize, whatever you want to call it, prize, because physical TCG, sorry. It gives only 1 point for 200 damage. It's pretty crazy, but it is hard to charge because you have to use water and lightning energy in the deck, so that's why you kind of are at the mercy of some randomness. But honestly, it's not too bad. You just gotta be able to stall long enough to get this card rolling, and then it just starts steamrolling and taking games. Anyway, guys, those are all of the sleeper non-EX cards that I wanted to talk about in this video today. If there are any other sleeper cards that you think are really good and should be highlighted, let me know down in the comments. So, yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. If you made it this far, leave a like, consider subscribing for more Pokemon content, and I'll see you in the next one.